Hi, I'm Brian Schrader, and you're listening to Outstanding in Your Field, powered by Pioneer Agronomy. I'm here with my co-hosts, agronomist Carl Joran and Krystal Williams.
Think of us as IT for your crops. If we know how to fix your issues, we'll tell you. And if not, we've probably got a workaround.
And if we don't, we'll find one because Mother Nature isn't like an on-off switch.
We're here this afternoon with Krystal Navarro, who is part of our pathology lab. Krystal's role, she serves as the plant pathology technology lead for our pathology lab in Johnston. And so we wanted to get her on here and talk a little bit about what the pathology lab is, how it relates to the field level for us, and also how she works with research and development in product development and some of those things. So, Krystal, welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you taking the time to be here. I guess first, let's talk about you. Tell us a little bit about your background, how long you've been with Corteva Pioneer, and just a little bit about how you've worked your way to the pathology lab.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. So I started my career in Puerto Rico. I have a background in agronomy. My parents were, small scale farmer. We had hydroponics. We sold a bunch of lettuce and different types of crops to local supermarkets. So first, when I was growing up, I got interested in diseases because in hydroponic systems, diseases are like the one thing you have to worry most of the time, other than making sure the water doesn't run out. So I went into agronomy, fell in love with it, diseases to see how I can better help my family. Eventually my father retired, so I said I'm gonna go to grad school because I want to keep learning. So I had the privilege to join the Ohio State University, both for my master's and my PhD, working with soybeans. I did a soybean cyst nematode, a lot of work with the soybean cyst nematode, and then switch a little bit still in soybean, but I did Phytophthora sojei research. After that, again, I was lucky enough to join Corteva, the company here. And what I started doing was phytosanitary work for the company. So making sure that the seed that we were moving to different parts of the world was safe to send out, right? Didn't have any pathogens, any problems. And then for the last 7 years, I've been growing in this area, and now I lead the entire team, which I'm super excited to share what we do, because we do touch very different parts of the organization, from early R&D development to commercial aspects. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a summary of who I am, and super excited to be here.
Yeah. So, Krystal, when you were at Ohio State, did you work with Ann Dorrance and with Pat Lips, or was Pat already retired by the time you had gotten there?
Yeah, so Dorrance is my advisor. So
Okay.
actually, she was definitely the person who taught me a lot of things about how to really translate science, right? She always had these way of looking at it, of everything we do has to be translatable into a farmer, or everything we do is to really answer a question to help our farmers. So I think she inserted that kind of idea that we need to do this for others. And yeah, happy that you
Yeah.
know her. She's really awesome.
Yeah, so the podcast listeners may know that I spent the first part of my career in Pioneer as an agronomist over in Ohio. And so I got to, work in the field with Dr. Dorrance and with Dr. Lips when he was around. We actually funded some early at Pioneer, funded some research in Phytophthora and some other things with Pat Lips, and identified some different things that helped us when we started to stand up the Pioneer seed treatment work, when we were, starting to treat with reps on the farm and everything. And so I, took samples and sent them down to Columbus and those kind of things for that project early in my career. So yeah, I've got some experience with that, and actually bumped into Pat Lips at a really interesting event one time, and we talked about some things. So yeah, so I do know them, and I would agree with you. Dr. Dorrance was incredibly good at being able to make things relatable in the field. Whenever I was at an extension meeting, she did a great job of taking very scientific topics and making it understandable for all of us in the audience. So yeah, very much agree with your comments about Dr. Dorrance.
Brian, I've got a question for Dr. Navarro here. I'm thinking, I live just outside of town, off Purdue's campus, and there's plenty of times where for somebody like me, it's pretty easy to just run a sample into Lilly Hall and let that disease and diagnostic laboratory do its thing. But also, come June and July, you've got folks, homeowners, landscapers, farmers, everybody's bringing their samples into to a lab like they've got here at Purdue. Krystal, where do you see the differentiation between what you all do in the Johnston Diagnostic Lab versus what a land grant institution might have access to?
Yeah, that's a great question because I think one of the really good things that land grant universities have is just that service they provide to really get down to identification of the problem. Sometimes we don't know what's happening in the farm, right? So this really quick diagnostics can really help us understand, what management practice to go to. I think the big differentiator with land grants and our lab here in Johnston is that we focus on the crops that we are producing. And land grant universities, again, you can have many different samples. I remember working at the clinic and receiving tomatoes. Although I was focused on soybeans, right? I remember sometimes we get ornamentals, and I would say one of the biggest differentiators for us is also the methodology that we use to run samples. So today, our team operates under molecular tools to do a really quick diagnostics. Our experts are looking at the plants, but we have the capability to test for many different pathogens at the same time. So it gives you this holistic view of what actually is happening. On top of, we get a lot of more information for the region because we receive samples of the Midwest, but all across the United States. So we can give our agronomists and our customers kind of like these like sense of, okay, hey, we're starting to see this disease popping up. Pay attention, talk with your folks, and get together. So I would say those are the biggest differentiators, but the great source of information and great effort they are driving in land grant universities.
So, Krystal, maybe that's a great segue to talk to us about the diagnostic lab. For those that may not be familiar, I think Krystal and Carl and I are because we send samples into you, but maybe for our listeners, just kind of walk us through the diagnostic lab and then what you all actually do in terms of the day-to-day for the organization.
Yeah, this is very exciting because I don't get to talk about this a lot. So you guys are going to have prime time conversations with me about it. But one piece of information I always like to bring up is the history behind the diagnostic lab in our company, right? We have been operating for over 50 years. And it started very simple. We were receiving samples because we had customers concerned about northern leaf blight in corn. And we were offering a little bit of understanding, hey, this is the disease. We also started looking at the phenotypes, looking at, okay, this is how it behaves in certain lines. And then it got more and more interest in the past, 50 years. And what we have been able to do is create this amazing service, again, to provide support to understand what the problems are. So we have been operated in Johnston, Iowa since we started. And today, if you wanna start talking about how we do it, it's a very simple process. We basically have a process where you collect a sample in the field, you submit it to our diagnostic lab, and then this is where the relationship with the customer starts, right? It's about, okay, tell me what you're seeing, tell me what you want to test for, and let's kind of do this investigative work to figure out what's there. But yeah, the history is a really important aspect. More than 50 years, we have experience with diagnostics, and we have been providing the service.
So two-parter for you, Krystal. If I'm a farmer and I'm hearing this, sounds like an awesome service. You mentioned your background in phytosanitary logistics. I would imagine that it'd probably be best served if we fill out the paperwork and send that sample in on the customer's behalf, as opposed to, giving them the address for the diagnostic lab. Is that a fair assessment?
Definitely. So because our diagnostic service is provided through the company, right? We have certain applications and software that allows us to track the samples and help us operate in a more simplistic way. So if you're a farmer and you say, hey, I'm looking at this and I really want to get down into, a real diagnostics, yeah, contact anybody in Corteva, and it is a free service. So that is something to highlight. We are covering all the expenses from shipping all the way to creating the diagnostics. And then at the end, when a diagnostic is completed, you receive a report that then you can talk about different management practices based on what came out. So yes, I would say the first step, if you're a farmer and you really want to utilize this free service, contact your company representative to initiate that process.
Perfect. And then one thing that you made mention of was kind of the idea of northern corn leaf blight, and us having an idea of kind of seeing that phenotypic expression and us knowing the genetic backgrounds. And we talk a lot about pedigrees and having a good understanding of our genetics. Can you share maybe there's been a time outside of that example where integrating our knowledge of the genetics has been helpful in solving a problem, and how that might be a differentiator from using other public labs?
Yeah, of course. I will touch a little bit on soybean, where we have Phytophthora sojei, and there are different, races of Phytophthora sojei. We can also use soybean cyst nematode with the different HT types that we see. Although it's not a service that we provide as, a continuous routine service, because there's a lot of land-grant universities who do that type of work. Whenever there's a product that, may not be performing the way we think it is performing, we always go back to the field and we try to retrieve those isolates. It could be that, maybe that specific fungi or Phytophthora race is kind of new, and we bring that into our R&D kind of process to kind of figure out what is happening. Are we seeing a change in the population? Or was this a flock and maybe you're seeing probably you're seeing like two pathogens actually invading that plant, and maybe that's the phenotype that you're seeing, right? So I think it's important that other than just providing a service, we do focus on the customers and the problems, right? So we work very closely to really understand what's happening out there. So we have a couple of other examples that we can kind of bring. If you take it to corn, we've had corn stunt and southern rust and a lot of really big problems that have popped out in the past 2 years, where we were at the front line to understand what the problems were.
On the corn stunt, Krystal, I mean, realistically, we were one of the first labs that really kind of identified that and figured that out. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit with folks? Because I know I'm getting a lot of questions from folks that are reading, articles in popular farm publications about corn stunt. And, I've said, hey, we're kind of on the bleeding edge of this thing. But I mean, you guys identified this really early on from the folks in Texas. Can you kind of talk to us a little bit about how that all took place?
Yes, of course. That was a very interesting, I'm gonna call it semi-epidemic, right? Because it was all of a sudden we started receiving samples around May, and then we said, okay, it's fine, it's one sample, and then May passed, June, July, August, and then all of a sudden it was across 3 different states, and people were very concerned about the yield losses of this disease that in the news have been, really popular, because corn stunt is a problem in Brazil and Argentina and has been taking down a lot of acres. So the first thing we did was boots on ground, right? We have to talk to our customers. We had to collect samples. And the biggest, I would say, benefit that our team did with, boots on the ground, and then also with our academic collaborators, was really trying to understand what was going on. So for 2 years, we started collecting samples. We started building molecular tools to identify the diseases within that huge complex, because corn stunt is not just one disease, right? It's several diseases affecting that plant at once. And it's all transmitted by a vector, which is the Dalbolus leafhopper. So we were seeing this interaction. You have populations of insects. Do you spray insecticide? Well, is it getting transmitted? Are we actually seeing the same thing Brazil and Argentina are seeing? And we built this really great collaboration with Texas A&M, Kansas State University, Oklahoma State University. We did a bunch of sampling. We provided the service again to the universities for more high throughput. And we were able to understand where we are, right, with that disease. We know that there are going to be years where you're going to see corn stunt because it's part of, the biology. But one thing that we have in the U.S. that is different from Argentina and Brazil is that we have harsh winters. And really the insect vector did not survive in the surveys that we did. So it was kind of really nice to see that, we have that protection for our corn belt that, it's not going to necessarily affect us in the next, years. So I think that was a great collaboration that we did. Again, it wasn't just us as a company, it was across the university and our stakeholders to be able to answer those questions.
I'm fascinated by this. I'll be really honest. What you guys do is really interesting to me because there's so many times, quite honestly, that in the field as agronomists, we've got a fairly decent idea sometimes of what we think is going on, but that's just observation, and there's a whole lot more to this. You'd mentioned the molecular markers that you're using. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that really means? We hear that a lot, and we kind of know what you're talking about, but in terms of trying to identify these diseases and help us with things, boots on the ground, as you say, can you talk us through how you guys use that and help us understand what a molecular marker really is?
Of course. And I do a lot of outreach with kids, and I use a story to kind of help understand what exactly a molecular marker is. So I'm going to tell the story the same way I say it out loud, right? So think about, you get sick all of a sudden, it's winter, you get a cold, and you need to understand what's happening to you. You go into the emergency room or urgent care, and then the first thing they say, hey, do you want me to run some tests to see what you have? It could be the many different viruses or, bacteria. So you collect the sample. Usually they swipe your nose or your throat, and then after that they send it for molecular testing, and then you come back and they give you a panel. They say, okay, maybe you have this virus, or maybe you have strep, and then from there you kind of create a medication. So this is the same process, right? We receive a sample, and when we say molecular markers, is that we have built a specific we have specific markers that identify specific species of fungi and bacteria. Again, these are regions in the DNA of that fungi that are very specific to that species. And the beauty about these markers, similar to when you go to the emergency room, they're very easy to run, and you can run many of them in a very small amount of time so that you can get a result back really easily. So yeah, think about you're going to the emergency room and you're getting tested for cold, and you get those results right away. And that's the same process we do in the diagnostic lab.
Okay. That makes a lot more sense and a little bit more relatable for sure.
Brian, I just think about all those times that we're in the field and we can say, I'm 80% certain this is what it is, right? And we're going to rotate back into that crop in a coming season. And it would be really helpful for us to actually know with 100% certainty, right? If you have damping off of soybeans, and well, if it's Pythium or Phytophthora, those are two very different animals in terms of one we can manage with genetics and one we can't. And just knowing the true differences, we've got lots of great experience in the field, but sometimes you do just need that, like Krystal was saying, that molecular marker diagnostic of this is the segment of DNA that can confirm it's actually this pathogen rather than another. It's full circle that way. I think the biggest theme I'm hearing of this conversation is that we can do a lot of things that land grant institutions can do. Maybe we have better throughput, a little bit better commercial speed and relevancy to what our farmers need. But the full circle approach of, if we come across a new population, a new race of a specific pest or pathogen, all of a sudden that can help inform our development process on the product side of things. And that continues to, meet the needs of the field, and having that relationship that's a big differentiator, and that keeps us relevant in terms of meeting the needs of growers in the field.
I think that's a great point, Carl, and you're absolutely right. As agronomists, a lot of times we're in the field and we're looking at things and we're like, well, I think it's this, but You know, a lot of things, quite honestly, especially right now with where planting started, a lot of diseases early on can look very, very similar. And without those tests that Krystal can do for us, it's hard for us to be able to say. And to your point, we're going to manage some diseases very differently. You know, they may look the same, but there's very different parameters around managing those the rest of the season. And so having some understanding and the ability to send samples into the lab to be able to really recognize that, I think is invaluable, and certainly probably a service that I probably don't use as often as I should, to be really fair about it. So
Yeah, and I want to give a shout out to the diagnostic team that operates here in Johnston. You know, Cassandra Breckenridge, Anna Furley. You know, one thing that I didn't mention when I was explaining this process is that when we receive samples, things don't go directly into a molecular test. There is this triage process, right? Again, taking it back to that urgent care story, they take you go in and they ask you, do you have a fever? Do you have high blood pressure? Like they run all these like triage process that then helps them understand what to test for. Same thing happens when the samples arrive in our lab, and these diagnosticians that we have many years of experience, 10 or plus years, looking at soybean, corn, canola, and they are able to look at the symptoms. And whenever they don't know exactly what's going on, they have the ability to call that representative from the company and say, hey, I don't know where to start. What are you seeing in the field? What exactly do you think is happening? And then it can drive us to get a more targeted identification. There are times where we just have to grow out the disease and the pathogen out, because our molecular markers are going to detect something that, it's there, but it's not the problem, the main problem we're seeing. So I think that piece of, investigative process that we do very closely with our customers, it's critical to be able to provide an accurate diagnostic so that you guys can understand how to manage it. And to your point, I do believe that a lot of people have the ability to understand what's going on in the field. We have really good expertise of people that, they just walk a field and they're like, this is probably, this disease. But sometimes, in soybean, for example, when we have SDS or we have these very early seedling diseases, that's where I think the molecular markers can really help us differentiate things that are not visible to our eyes. So anyway, just kind of want to, again, shout out to my team that they do a great job interacting.
Yeah. Well, we've talked a lot about the kind of field facing that goes with the representatives and the agronomists and territory manager and everything, but you guys also have a big responsibility or burden when you work with our breeders and the research and development team. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you all kind of fit in with them as well? I mean, it's not just in those cases about them seeing a problem in a nursery or something like that. You guys are very much involved in the early stages of development on these products that end up out in the field in the yellow bag or the blue bag or the Pro Box. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys do and the role that you play with research and development and product development.
That's a great question, Brian. So that's really important, because as we think about product development within our company, it's really important for us to determine what diseases we need to target in different zones, right? So if you're a breeder and, in the Midwest and you have, specific problems, how we support them in this process of early development through commercialization is that we are at the front line helping them actually observe the disease in early material. So on top of the diagnostic lab, the plant pathology team also has this group called inoculum production. So what we do there is that we take a little fungi and we make that really big, right? And we produce it in really big quantities. And the effort that we drive there is that then we can put these diseases in a control environment, and we can observe the disease every year, right? There's a lot of, regulations around it. It's not like we all of a sudden, spray diseases out in the field. So we have to be very cautious about that. But what it allows us to do is really to understand the resistance that this product that is going to end up in the field is going to have. So that's early on in the development. Also, late in the development, we do a lot of characterization. So we have another team that is dedicated, along with the breeding organization, to characterize products. So anything that is closer to be released, we go out to the field and we score it, and we provide a visual assessment of what that commercial line actually is resistant to. And we do that for many different pathogens, again, depending on the region. And that's where I think the pathology expertise combined with breeding is really important, because breeders are going out for yield, and we're giving that support to say, hey, but if you have this disease, you might see those yields going down. So it's this balance and interaction that happens between pathologists and breeders to really bring the best products into our customers' hands.
You talked a little bit about, there's some regulations around blowing these populations up a little bit. Before we started the podcast, we were talking a little bit about, in the early days of soybean rust, a lot of the regulation and the things that we had to do. Talk to us a little bit about kind of some of those things that you have to guard against, some of the things that, when we send a sample, depending on the disease, there has been in the past certain things that we had to do at the field level. Talk to us a little bit about what you guys are required to kind of adhere to in the lab to make sure that, again, we're not releasing some disease that we're putting in a nursery. That, I think folks would find that quite interesting, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's two aspects of these, right? So I'll start with the field component, right? So in the field, we have to follow USDA permits to be able to release something into the environment. So if it's not, approved by USDA, we cannot do it, right? And a lot of the times when we are characterizing and looking at phenotypes out in the field, the way we produce that, pathogen, it's something that is already there, right? So we need to make sure that we're not just taking a fungi from California and putting it in Illinois, right? We have to make sure that we have specific ways to determine that, hey, this is not going to really affect our neighbors, or it's not going to explode. So that's one way to look at it on the characterization part. On the diagnostic part, we operate also under it's called a PPQ permit, again, given by USDA. And because of the nature of that uncertainty, whether you're going to receive something that is new, that may be quarantinable, meaning that it might not be present in the US and we may need to control it. Every sample that we receive, it goes into destruction. So every sample you send to us cannot be released into the environment. We have to destroy it. And that is very important to understand, because that's what keeps us safe, right? It helps us to still identify something that is new and report it. But at the same time, you can still observe it and diagnose it. Whenever there is something new we have not observed, we always reach out to the academic sector and we call them. We have really good relationship with the diagnostic network. And then whenever it's something new, we report it to USDA. So we have really good relationships with the academia and the USDA to be able to control that.
So, Krystal, I guess as we're starting to close in on the end of the call, my last question, then I'll turn it around to Krystal and Carl, is I'm curious, in your career in diagnostics, what are a couple of the really interesting things that we've either stumbled onto within the organization or even during that 50-year history that you've had? I know we've developed some really interesting technologies that have changed kind of your space a little bit, but talk to us about maybe a couple of the really interesting things that over your career you've seen happen within the diagnostic lab.
Yeah, I would say there's always been this kind of understanding of like, oh, what we're seeing in the field is, this disease. But then it when it comes to your lab and you're looking at it and you're like, well, it doesn't match, all the details that we know about this disease specifically. It's reacting differently. The lesions are different. The spores are different. And that, I would say, that's one of the very interesting things that happen in our lab, that we are kind of the Sherlock Holmes of disease, and we have to figure out to be able to give that result. I would say in my time in Corteva, right, this has been happening for 50 years, but I think Southern Rust and Cornstalk have been one of those that um, it, it was really nice to be part of that, because one, we were able to understand the biology and really understand if this was going to cause problems in yield to our customers. And there's a difference, right? You're seeing the disease is everywhere. You can feel it, but it's not until you work with the breeders and the agronomy teams and you're like, but wait, but we still will have enough yield. So giving that reassurance to our customers that, hey, yes, it looks huge, but we're still gonna get through this together. I think that has been the most gratifying experience that I've had, and I'm really happy that we have these type of service and interactions to give that support to the people who are actually going through the problem.
I will say your service has been outstanding, and the diagnostics lab team and everything. I'm probably I know Brian said he used it a little bit, but I'm probably a repeat offender throughout the season. So I send quite a few samples, and my poor post office or UPS store always is wondering, like, what are you shipping? What is in these baggies that you're mailing? And so, from the label of having, permits and different things, that definitely creates some eyebrows raised of like, what do you mean you need a permit to be able to ship this or whatever? But it is so gratifying to be able to provide like a firm confirmation that this is what it is. Or sometimes it's, best case scenario, it comes back clean. Like that's the best scenario of it. And we're just over complicating things out in the field. And honestly, I'll send a few samples in and see if there's a trend. And then it just drives a more confident diagnosis throughout the season as I go and see similar things in a similar hybrid or something like that. So definitely appreciate all that you and your team do, and being close to some research centers too. I know it's fun to think about like, okay, all of these things are connected, and ultimately help us create better products and better product positioning and more information for our customers for their success. So thank you for all that you and your team do.
Of course, we're super happy to support it, and I'm happy that you're one of our bigger customers within the lab. I'm pretty sure our team appreciates it.
Krystal, you brought up a good point though about just the baggies and the shipping. Dr. Navarro, I'm curious, as your diagnosticians are receiving materials from folks like us in the field, or if, say, a really proactive farmer is bagging up samples for us to pick up to send on their behalf, what's the missing link? What is the information that we fail to send continuously that is a big part of solving the puzzle? And then for the second part, how does one take a sample and send it in? What do y'all need to have, in the bag before we ship it off to Johnston?
So I'll start with the later, because I think that's one that I would say we do a lot of education about, right? It's funny because sometimes, not a lot of times, sometimes we receive plants that are completely dead, and we're like, okay, where do we even start here? So I think the biggest piece of information is that if you can give us a hint of what you're observing in the field, because as I'm looking at a dead plant, I don't even know where to sample, right? So I want to make sure that, hey, were you seeing like, plants that had like a patch in the field? Was there water retention? I don't know, any extra detail that helps in the triage process, I think it's really important. And to answer the other question, what type of sample to send? Well, it depends, right? Which is the thing we say all the time. It depends. A lot of times, if you think about, if you have a disease that affects the roots, and we send a leaf sample, well, we might be able to diagnose a leaf disease, but it might not be the cause of the problem. But happy to say we are open to receive full plants, although probably my diagnostic lab is going to be like, why did you say that? But we have received full plants. I think what we relay a lot is the expertise of boots on the ground, like people like you guys that you know where to sample because you know where the problem is. And I would say the last thing is send more than one, right? You don't have to just send one. Just tell us, hey, these 3 samples I'm sending are for the same field, for the same problem, and then it will help us. Or just give us a call, right? Say, hey, there's a sample going your way, and this is what we're seeing, and we'll be happy to answer that. Or just come by the lab. We can work on it together.
Perfect. I love the kindred spirit aspect of, one, the answer of it depends, very much an agronomist pathologist answer, and two, the absolute lack of context when it comes to trying to solve a problem. How many times can we think of where you get a picture of a plant, no words, nothing else, and then we're supposed to divine out of the ether what the issue is or how it got there. And so just a great opportunity for all of us to learn alongside each other. The more information, the better. The better the sample, the better we can come across a good answer for you for how to manage for the future. So awesome. Thank you.
Well, Krystal, thank you for your time today and to get everybody kind of up to date and give us a clear understanding of what the lab does. One final question for you. In the spirit of the 100th anniversary of Pioneer, we've asked, most of our podcast guests, what they think about the 100th anniversary and, maybe a memory or something about that. And so we'll ask you that, as you reflect on the 100 years of Pioneer history. And you mentioned 50 years. So the lab's been around for, half of that lifetime. Anything that sticks out to you in your mind as you think about and reflect on the 100th anniversary of Pioneer?
Absolutely. And, I had the privilege to participate in the celebration here in Johnston. And it was kind of like one of those times that you're getting goosebumps because you're making history, right? I would say the following, I started, when I was in college, I did an internship with Pioneer. And, I spent 2 months pollinating and being part of the crew and learning from our breeders. And let me tell you, it was a life-changing. It was one of those commitments that we have as a company to say, hey, we're doing all this work because we really want to put something in the field that helps others, right? And it goes back to my roots. I remember being in the field with my dad and seeing like how we struggle so much with diseases, and we didn't have a line or a commercial product that we could say, oh, it's going to take care of these diseases and we're going to have enough yield to go sell to the supermarket. So seeing that commitment for 100 years and, hopefully 100 more years to go, right? I think it's something that I'm very passionate about and super happy to be part of.
I couldn't have said it better myself. So, well, thank you very much for your time. Again, thank you for kind of pulling the curtain back on the diagnostic lab for us to see what you all do and how you're working to contribute to our growers' success. And so we'll call it an episode. We appreciate you joining us for this episode. Thank Krystal for her time today. And we look forward to seeing you outstanding in your field.
Thank you.
This has been another episode of Outstanding in Your Field. Like and follow our podcast wherever you are listening. We've got a new episode at least once a month. You can also find us on YouTube by following Pioneer Seeds. You can find me on Instagram at B_K_Schrader.
I'm Krystal Williams. You can contact me at krystal.williams@pioneer.com.
And I'm Carl Jorn. You can follow along with me at CJorn on X or on Facebook at CJorn Agronomy. That's CJOERN.
That concludes this Pioneer Agronomy video podcast. Visit our page on pioneer.com and follow us on Twitter and Facebook for more agronomy insights.